All right, it's slightly after the top of the hour, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. For those of you that I haven't talked to yet, welcome to 2022. Megan is committed in another way today. So as a member of the Lead Educator Training Committee, I'm happy to facilitate for her this morning. This is our first of our quarterly Lead Educator Development Series updates for 2022. And I just want to acknowledge and thank our committee that's helping make this happen. Megan Hannafeld, Troy Walls, Lisa Pupp, Mariah Niemeyer, Erin Laborny, and Megan and I both serve also on that committee to help think about topics and important information we need to share with lead educators as we go throughout the year. So thanks to everyone for joining, and I'm sure we'll have continued group join as we go along. To get us warmed up a little bit this morning, a check-in question for the chat. What are you most excited for in 2022? So while we allow others to continue to join us, go ahead and tell us what you're most excited for personally or professionally in 2022. Ooh, nice, Mariah. Fun, kids. Good. If you're just joining us, we're sharing in the chat as a check-in as we warm up here and allow some time and into COVID. Amen. Let's hope. Oh, Nathan, yeah, you'll be busy. Oh, nice, Hannah. Lots of fun trips planned. That's good. Get your vacation on your calendars. Get those things planned. I agree.
Ben, is that training related to Market Maker?
No, it's not. It's actually specifically to train producers on how to change their production planning so they can include schools as a new market and kind of the rules and regulations of school markets.
I see. Nice.
All right, thanks everyone for sharing. Please continue to share. Today's agenda looks like this. Dave's gonna take some time to do a lead educator briefing for us on all the things that are happening that you need to be thinking about. Our training focus today is going to be around extension boards and kind of meeting structures, some pieces there. And we're going to spend the majority of time, because what we've heard from you in the past and during our last evaluation of these sessions is you want more time for conversation and sharing, because learning from each other is really where things happen. So we're going to try to spend plenty of time letting you idea share around some things you'd like to do with your extension boards in 2022. So we'll spend some time doing that. So I'm going to stop my share so that Dave can share, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Dave, to do the briefing.
All right, thank you. So a couple of things. So first of all, I think about half of the lead educators were on the NASEB briefing here an hour or so ago this morning. We had a really good clarifying conversation about the NASEB events on February 8th and 9th, and a lot of good questions from lead educators just about the process. And of course, a lot of new lead educators since the last time we did this face-to-face too at the Capitol. So that went really well. There's another one this afternoon, I think at 2 o'clock. And then one this evening at maybe 7:30 or so. So I encourage you, if you haven't already joined one of those, to join in, ask any questions that you might have that you're curious about regarding how that process is going to work. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today unless we have some time later to spend on that, because we have some focus time planned there. Just want to thank you all again. I can't do that often enough for everything you do. You are such an important cog in the wheel of Nebraska Extension across the state. I mean, it just takes an army, right, to make Nebraska Extension strong. And you are at the center of that, those groups across the state with the respective counties, not only with your office staff and your local culture, but also with stakeholders as well. So thanks for everything you do as lead educator. I'm going to keep my agenda pretty light today. So we have time to do exactly what Lisa mentioned, but there's a topic that I've continued to have questions around that I thought we'd spend some time on, and that is Nebraska Open Meeting Act. Because actually that act was revised in the Nebraska unicameral last spring, and a lot of it was based upon the COVID experience in the previous year. So just got 3 or 4 slides here I'd like to run through, and I've just kind of went to the Open Meeting Act and pulled out some pieces that I thought you'd be particularly interested in, or that I've had questions about previously relative to extension boards and what they must adhere to with the Open Meeting Act. And if you need further clarification on any of these points, or if I've missed something completely you have questions about, please just chime in and ask those questions. So go to this brief slide deck. All right, so I've somewhat grouped these bullet points, but they are, there we go. So
Dave, we're seeing that in presentation mode, so it might be hard to read some of your bullets.
I'm sorry, let me swap
Okay.
that.
Yep, there you go.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so it's important first to note that extension boards were created related to the Interlocal Cooperation Act. So this is something that went into play a long time ago. Actually, maybe as long as 20 years ago is when this actually happened. But that actually basically gives us permission and requires us to follow Open Meeting Act, and gives us the right to meet virtually for at least part of our meetings throughout the year. So that's an important piece just to note in case someone asks, well, why do you think this applies to you? It's because we have this interlocal agreement with our county partners. And that has to do with either whether it's video conferencing or a meeting via telephone. And in the previous act, those two were differentiated. There were different rules depending on how you were meeting electronically. Now they are looked at as one and the same. So it doesn't matter which electronic means you're using to communicate. So this is very important, and that is that you can convene up to 1/2 of your meetings in a calendar year virtually, up to 1/2, right? And so what that does not include would be any emergency meetings that might need to be called by your board. And I would just caution you when I say emergency meetings. When I say emergency meetings, that means you followed the strict guidance of the Attorney General as to what constitutes an emergency meeting, right? And it can't be some just minute detail of we forgot to set up the meeting, or we have this spur of a moment thing we need to talk about, but it's really not a critical issue. Emergency meetings are not taken lightly by Open Meeting Acts. So just want you to be thinking about that if you ever have to decide you might need to call one. So up to 1/2 of your meetings a year can be virtually. So another important point is that even if you are hosting an extension board meeting virtually, you're still required to have an in-person, face-to-face public site where an individual who doesn't have access to telephone, to internet, et cetera, Zoom, could actually attend the meeting in person. So that would typically be wherever you would host a face-to-face extension board meeting, and a board member should be present. So it would typically be probably the lead educator and a board member, usually the board president, but probably could be any board member present at that meeting. And of course, at that meeting, you would also have hard copies of any handouts that you may have otherwise distributed electronically to the remainder of the board. So this is another thing to think about. So if you're having a meeting virtually, and you have a person who's like, well, I cannot, I want to participate. No, I'm sorry. You're having a meeting, a physical meeting. You're having a meeting, a typical physically present extension board meeting, and someone said, a board member says, I'd like to join virtually, or I want to join virtually, or it's more convenient to join virtually. That person doesn't count as a part of it. They should not be involved in the conversation. They cannot vote. They do not count towards quorum. So they are essentially not there. All right. So it's really not, doesn't make any sense to have a board member join virtually when you're having a face-to-face meeting, because that individual just doesn't have the authority to speak or contribute to the conversation in any way. So I know there's been a lot of questions about this, and I asked for clarity from NU legal counsel on exactly how this is viewed. And so this is their interpretation. A question that came up, it's a recent meeting where many lead educators were present, had to do with what can you do in a virtual meeting regarding unruly behavior by someone who's just very disruptive to the meeting. And if you look at Open Meeting Act regulations, I mean, it says in there you can establish and enforce any reasonable rules and regulations regarding conduct at the meeting. So that transcends to the virtual world as well, right? So I would encourage you to do here is you give folks as much grace and space as you can in that virtual meeting. But if someone's being extremely disruptive, you can dismiss someone from that virtual meeting, right? You can mute them, you could dismiss them from the meeting, from the virtual meeting. Just make sure that it would be for similar reasons that you might do so if they were in a physical space and being disruptive. So under what conditions would you do that, right? And some of that would have to do with the fact that in an open meeting, everyone has the right to hear what's going on in the meeting and to be heard, right? And so if someone's being disruptive to the meeting process, to others trying to participate in the meeting, that's not acceptable. And you can take appropriate actions to minimize that disruption. Along the same lines, when you're meeting virtually, especially if you're a video conference, you can require that individuals identify who they are and that they turn their camera on. So indeed, you can see that, you can verify that that's who's in the meeting. You know, that would be the case in the physical space, right? They would be there right in front of you. There'd be no question who the individual was. You can require this in the virtual space. This is a little more difficult to do on the phone, right? You can ask for their identity, but of course you're not going to see the individual. But there's a theme here, right? So think about how you'd handle things in the physical space and how does that transcend to the virtual meeting world. When you think about notices for public meetings, I would encourage you, of course, you need to publish notices for all meetings, including virtual meetings, right? I would not put your Zoom link or a password or any of that stuff in that public notice. If you look at the public notice section of your local newspaper, you'll see that some entities do that. That's inviting problems. All right, and some of you have experienced folks Zoom bombing extension board meetings. So you can simply note that the public can contact your office for connection details, right? And so then you can share a link, and you might even say, we'll share the link with you now, but we won't share the password until the day of the meeting. Or I mean, you can manage that however you wish. But just know that that detail for connectivity does not have to be in the public notice. Minutes for virtual meetings are just very similar to what they are for an in-person meeting. Within 10 days or prior to the next convened meeting, whichever comes first, is standard for our open meetings. What the question I received from a couple of you is, do we need, if we are recording the meeting, or are we required to record the meeting if it's conducted via phone or via Zoom? And then is that recording accessible by the public? And it is not required, and you are not required to release that. The only thing you're required to release are the standard written minutes of the meeting. And then winding down here. Another question is around, some of you have what you consider executive committees. So these would typically be the officers, extension board officers, and in some cases, I think every other month, maybe the full extension board meets a month, maybe in the off month, just the executive committee is meeting to conduct business, to pay bills, basically, right? To give the authority to pay bills and any decisions that need to be made in the interim between the full body meetings. So the extension board does have that authority to give subcommittees authority to do hearings, policy. This is verbiage directly out of Open Meetings Act, or to take any formal action on behalf of the parent body. So what this is saying is extension board cannot give authority to an executive committee to meet to do exactly what this says. But there's a couple caveats here that are really important to note. So when those subcommittees meet, that's a public body, that's a public meeting. So it needs to be advertised just like any other extension board meeting, even if it's only the exec group meeting. And so they are subject to all of the rules and regulations of Open Meeting Act. And that those meetings, those executive meetings, count towards your up to half of your annual meetings can be conducted virtually. So what you can't say is, well, we have 6 meetings that are full body and 6 that are exec. So the 6 full body meetings will be virtual, and the other 6 will be in person, or vice versa. I mean, what this is saying is that if you look at all the meetings, exec and full body, that happen throughout the calendar year, up to half of all of those meetings can be conducted virtually and no more. All right, I'm going to stop there and see what questions you have.
Dave, this is Karen Wobig. I have a question. So did you say that all committee meetings have to be published? Like, for instance, a nominating committee that might meet to talk about, nominations for new board members. That has to be a published meeting?
So let me see exactly what the verbiage said in the act here.
Sorry, don't mean to put you on the spot, but
Yeah, I wouldn't consider a committee meeting as being a public meeting. In your case, Karen, give me an example of the number of board members that would be involved in such a committee.
it's usually like 3.
Okay, so that's certainly a minority. You have a 9-member board, is that right?
10.
10, yeah. So I would look at that. A committee, because the committee is typically going to bring their recommendations back to the full board for consideration, right?
They do, and then the voting occurs then as well.
Yeah. So in an example that I shared earlier with these exec committees, they are actually making decisions. They've been granted authority to make decisions, and typically in examples that have been shared by lead educators, they are making budget expenditure decisions.
Okay.
So that's why it's needs to be published, and it falls under the Open Meeting Act policy.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yep.
Dave, there's a question in the chat around how about executive sessions and virtual meetings? Jenny, you might want to expand on your question.
I'm just thinking that sometimes executive session is one of the tools you use in a meeting, and it you could do it in Zoom, but I just wondered if that would be something that we should stay away from. I'm just asking.
Yeah, well, my recommendation would be to always refrain as much as possible from going into executive session, right? Because it goes against the Open Meeting Act, the intent of it. If it's a personnel issue in particular, I mean, that's one of the number one reasons that may warrant going into executive session if they're going to discuss personnel matters. Outside of that, there probably aren't a lot of good reasons to go into executive session, but in the virtual, you could certainly do that. You could go into a breakout meeting with only those who need to be, should be a part of that. And I mean, you handle it very similar to the way you would in with a physical space meeting. You're basically gonna go into another room. And when you come out of executive committee, you'll open it back up to the whoever else happens to be on the Zoom session. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I think so. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jenny.
Hi,
Someone
Dave,
else?
this is Nancy Frex. I have one question.
Hi, Nancy.
What about like when we have our meetings, sometimes my accountability educators don't come to the meeting, but they give their reports via Zoom. So they would be participating via Zoom, but they're not a voting member or count to the quorum. Is that all right?
You bet. Yes, yes, it is. They are not a part of essentially the acting body, the decision-making body. So absolutely you can do that. I would encourage you to do that. Saves all of you a lot of time and travel and expense to do that. So
Okay, thank you.
someone had mentioned to me also, just in addition to unruly behavior at meetings, just obscene behavior, things like that. I would say anything that's distracting, highly distracting in a meeting, gives you reason to dismiss that person from the meeting. So I would just simply use your discretion in those situations. If you have and there's, I can think of a couple situations across the state where we've had folks really challenge us on the way board meetings are managed, and sometimes they feel like they're not been given the floor or given equal opportunity to participate in the meeting. Those situations are few and far between. So it's one of the reasons I ask that you just be very do everything you can to manage the meeting with those who are on. But when it's distracting to the point that people are uncomfortable, business cannot continue to be conducted, others cannot hear, others are not being given the floor to speak, etc., as you wish, that's when you can dismiss someone from the meeting.
Dave, there's some questions around clarity around publishing meeting dates and times. Can you use social media as a way to promote those public meetings?
You can, but the rule of thumb there is make sure you have a standard place that's accessible to just virtually everyone. And really the best place, one of the best places would be a courthouse, right? So definitely have those notices in a public place, a truly public. It could also be in your local extension office, a courthouse, obviously newspapers, could be on your website, but I would not rely exclusively on electronic dispersion of public notices, because not everyone has access.
So Dave, I wanted to share what we did earlier this week, and possibly it was wrong. So that's why I'm sharing. So we had in one of our counties, someone wasn't feeling well, was waiting for test results on COVID. Another person could not get in due to a medical issue. And so the local team posted in the county office, posted on their website, posted on Facebook, emailed everybody and said, due to health and safety issues, we are moving tonight's meeting to virtual. And then, so we did post that Zoom link on, on everywhere because it was last minute, but that was what we did to, and then we did have the office manager at the office, because we know one extension board member doesn't have computer access to get on a Zoom. And so that person came in. So our office manager was there should anybody show up. Mm-hmm. Did that work? I mean, I asked Hillary. So
yeah.
Before I did it,
so I'll give you two answers. Okay. So the first answer would be I'd be careful about doing that very often, except when it's truly an emergency, a last minute issue. A lot of situations it might be best just to postpone that meeting. But the big caveat here is you just have someone at the meeting, physical meeting location where someone who would have appeared or shown up for the face-to-face meeting could have participated. So I think that you were covered. You know, that would not be considered. I mean, some folks might question the audible to virtual on short notice. But because the individuals could have still participated in the way it was publicly advertised, I don't think you have an issue.
Okay, thanks. I just thought I'd share that for,
Yeah,
I'm sure others are gonna be experiencing that, right? Like, oh
Yeah.
shoot, do I have COVID? And then figuring that out. So
then you've used up one of your virtual meetings for the calendar year,
we sure did.
right? So
And- yeah,
so just think about that as well. And the other thing I just thought about, you were mentioning the reason. So, you know, even if someone is sick or they have COVID, I mean, according to strictly Open Meetings Act law, I mean, if they're online, if the meeting is happening virtually, locally, physically, they are not a participating member.
that's a good reminder as well.
And they're just better really not to join, because how hard would it be just even to
Right.
on and.
Dave, can you say that again? I want to make
Yeah.
sure I heard you correctly.
So if a board member says, hey, Deb, board meetings tonight, I think I have COVID, I'm sick, I'm not feeling well. I know the meeting is in Syracuse at the extension office, but I want to join virtually. They can turn on Zoom and watch, but they can't participate, they can't vote. They are not part of the quorum. So they are strictly an observer as far as the decision-making party is concerned.
But potentially in the case of Angie's example, and I don't know for sure if it was all staff members are not legal members to vote, right? So the board could have met with someone to get them in, and the staff members could have Zoomed, right?
Staff members being support staff.
Or the educators that might have been the ones that were.
Oh, yeah, that would be similar to our earlier conversation around the accountability region.
Yeah.
How you could chime in. Yeah, right. So the other thing about this, your example, Angie, that didn't quite hit the mark, is that you should have a board meeting at that physical location. So typically that would be when you have a virtual meeting, but you have that physical location access, would typically be a lead educator and probably the board president that would be present there. So in your case, you didn't have either one. It doesn't seem.
Correct. So yeah, so our lead educator was whatever COVID stuff. And then so we did do it virtually. And so in the future, what we could have done is ask the office manager to be there to set up the Zoom, still have the extension board be there, and then our extensions team members could have Zoomed in, because it's not like they're really part of the board, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Another quick question while I've got the mic on. Do we allow, and I need to look through the rules of law better, are proxy votes allowed or no?
No.
Okay.
There's a question about location. Dave, does the board meeting always have to be at the extension office, or can it be at another public location?
It could be at any public location. Just think about access, ADA access, being in a location where, think about if you're in a community that has a Hispanic or any other underrepresented audience, would they feel comfortable attending at wherever the location is? Right. So even sometimes courthouses where we have board meetings is not the most friendly place, right, for an individual to go. So anything that you feel would be intimidating, discriminating, a barrier, a reason for someone not to attend would probably not be a good place to host a meeting. But yeah, extension offices, public halls, places within the community where lots of meetings are typically conducted that have ADA access would be good choices.
I just have a question. So if an extension board member is joining via Zoom, what is the difference? And it is an in-person meeting. Why can't they talk at all? However, other non-voting members can.
Yeah, has to do with, they are part of the decision-making body. And they have influence on the decisions that are happening in the meeting. So any commentary that they would make could influence other board members. Right. So it's part of just that line. And it's a great question, Nathan, because during COVID, this was murky, right? I mean, you probably had county boards where county board members were joining. Someone thought they had COVID, so they were joining virtually, and there's a little bit of the Wild West of Open Meetings Act. And so that's where more clarity is being described now in the act. And I've been consulting with our legal counsel on all these questions to make sure that we're on solid ground with the way that we proceed. It's really interesting. I did consult with NACO and asked if they would want to chime in on best practices too. And they did not take me up on that offer.
I have a question. Okay, we have joint counties. In our meeting, every other meeting, board members travel to that county. Executive board meetings, and I hope we've read this correctly. If we have a staff member in Morrow County, a staff member at the office in Scottsville County, board members go to each county, and then we do it via Zoom for the executive meeting. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, because our interlocal agreement says that and it's very old, that we can have telephonic telephone meetings.
Yeah, and you still can, according to Open Meeting Act, you can still have telephone meetings.
executive.
And I'm thinking about Jenny Nixon, Kayla Hendricks, these where you have multiple boards, or in some cases, one board that's serving multiple counties. You can have multiple public locations. But what you want is each of those public locations should have a board member present.
You don't have to though, right, Dave?
Mhm.
You don't have, like mine covers Cheyenne, Kimball, and Banner. So that's like 2.5 hours. We don't have to have 3 places right every time.
Right. It's one board for all 3 counties.
Yeah.
Yeah. My understanding is just one location, just one meeting location, right? And that's been a little bit, I had that conversation with legal counsel, and they were kind of swaying towards maybe each county should have a location. I said, well, when we have one board serving multiple counties, that should not be a requirement. And they were fine with that once I described how that actually looked. So yeah, you're good.
Even with those executive board meetings, with Open Meetings Act, it gives people from the community a place to go if they want to attend those meetings.
Right. I mean, if you think about the underlying principle, I think one thing about this is my guiding light for Open Meeting Act is, am I, we're not trying to hide anything. Are we providing open access to decisions that are being made around taxpayer dollars? So that's what that open access is about, is giving everyone, regardless of access to technology or otherwise, a way to participate in these meetings. And not that you're going to have large crowds, right? But the access is always there. The door is always open.
I have a question, but this is regarding in person. Is that okay if we switch directions a little bit?
Sure.
So, and this is completely hypothetical, but we had someone call a community member, and they're having, oh gosh, I mean, it's just like a long heated feud with one of our extension board members. And so the person called and was basically like asking like what this person's role was on our board and blah, blah, blah. And like we called him, we let him know that this other not nice party was calling. And basically, I guess my question is, there is a chance that this person, not nice person, could show up to our extension board. And obviously it's a public meeting, but like, I mean, the only purpose he would be serving is to kind of like cause drama. So like, are you able to ask them to leave? Like if they are kind of disrupting the meeting, we're not able to perform business. And, it does kind of like, I mean, if it's pretty understood, it's like they are serving no other purpose but to like, obviously get at this one person. Can we ask them to leave? Is that allowed?
Yeah, you want to be really careful with that, Hannah.
Okay.
So, I mean, you can have someone in the audience that's kind of making nonverbal signals, making faces, an occasional, moan, or just like, oh, I can't believe you did that. Or, I mean, or you're not thinking about the taxpayers. I mean, you might even hear outbursts or things like that from someone on the audience. We see that in county board meetings frequently. So that would be just behavior that you might expect in a public meeting as such. The one thing you might think about, probably on most of your agendas, there's not a place for public comment, right?
Yeah.
And so this is something to think about. So some boards have a 5-minute or like an agenda item, maybe at the end of their meeting or some point in their meeting, where if there's anyone from the public that would like to speak, that's their opportunity, but it's limited in time. Like you have 5 minutes, and the individual speaks their piece, and then you move on to the next person. So you just might think about whether that's something the board would want to adopt in case that situation does arise.
But he can but they could technically stay for like the entirety of the meeting.
So long as they aren't disrupting it, in a significant way.
Okay.
And, I'll ask this question with our council, whether we're required to put that public comment section in a meeting, or, I mean, if there's not an item on the agenda that person, is in a position to speak to, there really is no opportunity for that individual to speak at the meeting, right? And they are just simply an observer and listener. And the question is that okay or not?
Yeah.
Right. So let me do a little bit digging on that one.
Well, and hopefully this person never comes to one of our meetings. So
Yeah, but they easily could, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, let's leave it at that. If I would just say if that person comes to a meeting tomorrow, I mean, they're not on the agenda, they don't have a reason to speak, and see how that plays out. And if you feel like there's that pressure that we may perhaps need to have a time on the agenda for them to speak, we could do that. But the thing is, you don't want to hear from that same person every single meeting about the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I want to check with legal counsel, is how we best handle that to minimize that type of disruption. It's very infrequent, but when it happens, it's very uncomfortable for all.
Dave, there's a couple additional questions I think you should look at, and maybe I'll give you some time to look at them, and then we can come back and you can answer them, because I think one of them, Kim's, is a good one. It's really on reoccurring bills and budgets, and some thoughts there on what you have to approve each month or not, and can you just approve them as a group? And so I'll let you ponder that one and look at Sarah's and Angie's thoughts, and we can come back for you to answer those. While you're doing that, I'm going to show a couple of resources I just want to make sure people are aware of as we talk about extension boards. So I'm going to share my screen quick. Keep adding your questions if you have them for Dave, things that we can address. Our extension employee website, right? This is the page you come up after you log in when you get on our employee website. And hopefully you know that if you go to unit management, the first link there is to the lead educator page. And this is the resource page that has been continually updated now as we've kind of turned the page with lead educators. The links to the previous recordings are here. So this one will be put up as well, so you can come back to it. And then below that are the resources that have been added under each of the roles, right? And so I wanted to show you, specific to today's discussion, the facilitating local extension boards. If you open that, you can find the Open Meetings Act, which Dave referred to, right? So you can go read that, and for some light reading sometime if you want to. And then some other pieces that are there. A new one that has been put up is an agenda template. I'm going to show you that in a minute. It's just it's one example, right, of what you could use and what you could do. your board application forms, position descriptions, appreciation certificates, and then the link to NASEB as well. So some things that are there. If there are other things you think should be here, other ideas of things you want, the committee is always taking those recommendations. I think we have a few additional ideas that are on the list to get up here, but the new one is the template. Before I show you that, I want to show you, Megan did do a little diving into constitution and bylaws for extension boards. And if you look at your constitution and bylaws, there are specific things listed that need to be included in your meeting agendas. So make sure you look at that. This is that list, right? And you can do that in a variety of ways, but these are the things that are asked that you are going to include each time you have a meeting. Very, pretty basic things, right? But to make sure that you're covering these so that if someone ever went back and you reviewed that constitution and bylaws, that you're following that. Some additional things that we've seen people do that are really good ideas as you're thinking about ideas is a lot of you we've heard do some kind of extension advocacy, like report out. The board members themselves do a report out, either at roll call or at a time during the meeting. Who have you talked to about extension? Maybe what's impacted them recently, just you can do that in a variety of ways. Some of you ask your board members on a monthly basis to talk to someone about extension specifically and then come back and tell the story. Some of you allow for time for board members to do some reports on what's happening in the community, the kind of the needs assessment approach. And then some of you are also doing some deep dives into programming, and I've heard that's gone really well, where you ask one of your educators to come and actually teach part of a program, or your assistants to teach part of a program so that your board members actually know. And that takes a little more time in a meeting. Yes, inviting them to the actual program to see it as one approach. But for some, doing a piece of that or highlighting that at a meeting is also kind of another educational avenue that you can take to do that. So I just wanted to just share that. I'll go back to this template and show you what's up here. And some of the things that we really liked about this particular template. Can you see that? It's probably pretty small. Some things that we liked on there is it does give a reminder about the Open Meetings Act, right at the top of the page. It lists board members and contact information so that board members know how to contact each other, and terms, so everybody is on the same page of when people are coming and going on the board. And then the agenda is laid out. Things that require a motion are highlighted with an asterisk. Robert's Rules of Orders does say you can denote things that are decision-making items, information items. There's a lot I think we could learn on how to better use parliamentary procedure during our meetings. I think for me, that's been something I've noticed with a lot of the questions I've seen is what do we need to do? Because Robert's Rules of Orders does say that you need to approve the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. That everyone agrees that this is the agenda for the meeting. I don't know that everybody does that. And some of the basic things. I think one thing we've debated over the years is whether extension revolving accounts and cost object reports need to be on there. I think we've said not necessarily. If so, it's just an information and a transparency piece, because the board is not approving anything as it relates to your program accounts, but being transparent and open is important as well. So I think there's that balance of those things. And then how do you do reports? That's the big one. If I remember anything about extension board meetings, the dreaded report time and the long time it's spent for everybody to report. So do you have a rotation on who reports from your staff so that not everybody's doing it every night? And is there a time limit? You can do that. You can put time limits to the entire agenda as well to keep things moving. I think one thing I've talked to several of you about is, do you meet with your president prior to the meeting to walk through the agenda so they're ready to lead the meeting in an effective way? Or is that the first time they've seen it and they're not sure what to say? I mean, what are some things you can do to help the time that you spend together be more effective? So that's another piece that you want to do. The other thing I read a lot about when I was reading about boards was, are you asking your board members what they want at the meeting? once a year, do you have a discussion and maybe let them decide how the program report should be done or how often, or, just letting them be a part of the decision making about the meeting in itself is a thing you could consider. And so I think thinking about what's most meaningful to them, what's most meaningful to us, what we want to make sure. I've had, there's a question about when are roll call votes needed. That can be, it really depends. And when I've seen that most effective and used for Robert's Rules of Order is when the decision becomes questionable. When we say all those in favor say aye, opposed say nay, and the president can't make an official decision based off of the voice call, they can call for a roll call vote or a hand vote or a secret ballot vote at that point at any time to make sure that they effectively know what the answer to that vote is. And
all those options, Lisa, but I would encourage you just to have roll call votes for every item. I mean, it takes a minute or less to do that. It's just about clarity around the meeting, who's voting for what, you got an official record of it. So it's really a best practice, and you'll see your county board meetings do that almost exclusively.
Absolutely. So just some resources to go look at. I just want to remind you about those. Dave, if you want to take a little bit,
Yeah.
I think we've had a great dialogue with everybody on, so let's go ahead and dialogue some more on your questions. And I'm going to put another question in the chat that you guys can respond to while we're going, and we'll kind of spend our time doing that.
Okay, so Kim asked about reoccurring bills, telephone, internet, same every month. Do they need to be discussed, listed, voted on every time? Can there be a motion to pay these in bulk? So a couple of things to think about here is, let's just say you're meeting every other month. So what you could do is have a motion at a meeting where you delegate the authority to review those bills, such as suggested here, on a monthly basis, and to forward those on to the county board for approval. What I would do, though, at that subsequent board meeting, when your extension board next meets, I would have those bills on there, so if they see them and they officially approve them at that time. It's retroactive, right? Because the county board's probably already approved them and paid them. But what it shows is that it's in front of them. We're not hiding anything from them. As a lead educator, that's a protection to you. They're granting you the authority to go ahead and review and move those on to the county board for timely payment. But you're also letting them to see what those actual expenditures are at their next meeting. So there's no question about that.
So
Go ahead.
if we have our treasurer, secretary treasurer in monthly to look at them, or the president to review them monthly, to send them on to the commissioners and then vote on them when you have your meetings, that's appropriate?
It's probably cleaner just
Who reviews?
yeah,
Who
you can
reviews?
look at it, but it would be best just to have that as a motion from your board that they're granting such authority. But it's not the board's actually not approving when that president or you pass that on to the board, right? They haven't approved it necessarily. They've granted you the authority to move it on to the county board for approval. So what I'm saying, what we don't want to do is substitute a extension board president reviewing financials in lieu of having maybe the executive board, an actual board meeting decision approving those financials.
So you want the rhetoric to read approval to move the bills to the commissioners, to the board? Is that what you're telling me?
Giving the lead educator the authority to move the such bills, very specific, to the county board on a timely basis for payment, right? But then you're also going to have those bills on the subsequent next month's agenda, or when the board meets again, either the exec or the full board, to officially approve those expenditures.
But just a copy of the claims would be fine, right?
Right.
Then they can, if they want to review that, they can, but we can, okay. So I can, okay. I think I gotcha. Just
have all that documented though, okay?
Yeah.
So as a lead educator, just don't take the prerogative to say, well, I think I can approve this and I'm going to do this, and not have the board backing, have any documentation saying, hey, well, the extension board, who's an extension of the county board, gave me the authority to do this.
Right. Okay, so the county board also approves our budget before we send it to the commissioners.
Mhm.
The commissioners discuss it and then approve what they're going to give us.
Mhm.
Then we bring it out to our county board, and our county board goes over all of this again for, the spreadsheet with the expenditures for the whole year.
Mhm.
Right? But we still, and I always, it's always there every month so they can see what percentages we've spent, yada,
Right.
yada.
Perfect.
And is that enough? Or do you want individual itemized telephone, internet? I've got the spreadsheet of what we spent or what was allocated for that. Is that sheet good enough to cover all of those specific the same thing every month?
Yeah, if you had for example, if you had a spreadsheet month to month showing what the expenditures are each month, you have your budget, and
Yeah.
each month you have what's expended and remaining budget for the fiscal year, and that's how they're reviewing bills. To me, that makes sense.
Perfect. Thank you.
Kim, and there's a question in the chat that relates. It's really good. And that's what I've always believed. And it's on the other boards that I'm on, is how we operate, that the board makes the approval at the beginning after they approve the budget, that things can be paid unless they go over budget. Like on the boards I'm on, I never see an itemized list of the monthly bills because we've approved the budget. And only when it goes over budget do you have to approve extra expenditures. Is that?
Yeah, the best practice would be to approve expenditures as they are happening throughout the year. Again, it's just a protection to you as a lead educator and the extension board. You don't want to get 11, 12 months into the fiscal year and find out you have a problem.
Right.
Or
Transparent.
you've got paying bills that you weren't aware of. So just keeping this all very transparent is the best practice. Related to this question, so you may also have meetings, especially when you're meeting very frequently, where you may have a consent agenda item at the front end of your board, and that consent agenda item might include just all the typical routine approvals. And one of those might be for some of these budgeted items or things that just happen every board meeting. So consent agenda items are okay to use if you feel like you need to. They're really a time-saving mechanism within the agenda. But again, you want to make sure you're not hiding anything behind that consent agenda that the public and your board are not fully aware of. I was looking for the next question here. So after Kim, if you have an approved phone meeting for executive meetings, board members can join from home. Still need a public access point for that phone meeting. So you need to have someone at the extension office or the public meeting site. Otherwise, that's not a public meeting. Angie had mentioned relative to the earlier conversation, can you ask someone who's being kind of unruly in a meeting to address what specific issue is related to the person and the issue they have, how it's related to the work of extension, etc. That's a good question. It kind of goes back to what Lisa said earlier when you talked about approving the agenda for the meeting, right? So it's a nice way just to show everyone that agenda items are required to be submitted in advance. This is the agenda for today's meeting, and this is what we're going to follow. But the question is, do you want to have a segment in there that is public access time or not? And I'll do some more checking on what that looks like. Do you need to refer link? Oh, so Deb's asking if in a Zoom meeting, do you need to refer to or link to the Open Meetings Act? So they currently do that during their face-to-face physical meetings. Do you want to do that in Zoom? It's always good to acknowledge that. In fact, that's one of those things that sometimes is in a consent agenda, or that your county board will say, acknowledge that this meeting has been publicly advertised. So we're following Open Meeting Act is essentially what they are saying. So acknowledging that some way at the beginning of the meeting, and that could even just be something that the board president acknowledges up front. Could be an agenda item where you actually do acknowledge it. And that'd be easy to incorporate into your Zoom meeting. What about having, I think, Jennifer, you're referring to having the extension board review the 4-H council financials? Yeah, so I'm going to leave the audit function to the 4-H specialist to say whether they consider that an audit. But I do think it's a great idea to keep the 4-H council budget in front of the extension board on a routine basis. Because really the 4-H council falls within that umbrella of the extension board's purview. So I think it's great for them just to be aware of what that budget looks like. So if there's ever an issue, they would be in the loop again as a support mechanism for you, a support group. So I think that's a great idea. But as far as an audit function, I don't think it quite reaches the audit mark, but it is a great way to monitor the budget.
Jennifer, we used to say that we wanted that extension board to review that yearly for the 4-H council. Like Dave said, the 4-H council rep should be sharing that throughout the year. And it was at least the 1 year kind of piece that a different group reviewed there for that audit function, but I'm not sure if that's changed or not. So I agree. I'm not going to answer that anymore either, because they could have changed that since I've been in that role.
And that's what it used to be. I just didn't know with this changeover. That's why I think there's a lot of us that do that, because at one point we were kind of encouraged. So I don't know if that question should go back to the 4-H coordinators and Kathleen from you guys, so that they're not getting it 17 times, I guess is what I'm worried about. If you guys could follow up and let us know. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, the thing my concern there, Jennifer, would be that there's really no one guaranteed to be on that extension board that really is in an auditing position that can really speak to that. Really, they're just monitoring expenditures. And
yeah, I think it was used as a review more than an official audit, Dave, the terminology at the time. So yeah, we can double check that.
So Deb asked about these approvals. You need to have that approval again once a new lead educator comes into the picture. Typically, I would say not if it's a standing motion, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to revisit those motions at least annually. So you have a new board coming on each year, right? New members. That would be a good reminder to the entire board that this is a part of our process, and to make sure everyone on that board for 2022 feels comfortable with that process. I think I caught all the questions. Lisa,
I think you did too. Thanks, Dave. This has been a good hour of sharing and asking lots of questions. For our last couple minutes, I put in the chat the statement around what's something you're going to try with your board meetings in 2022. It could be a variety of things, but if you'd like to jump in the chat and share some of those as we leave, or share out loud as we kind of conclude today, please add those.
Yeah,
Okay,
Jay, we'll follow up on that consent agenda item.
Yep.
I'll just jump in. We started doing the board member reports this like halfway through last year, and we divided out so that not everybody is giving a report each meeting. So we have a couple board members each meeting that are reporting to what they're seeing happening in their employment area or whatever area that they're representing for us.
Good deal.
Nice.
You know, Ann, you reminded me too. So we're talking about these financials and stuff, right, in the board process. So my suggestion to you would be transparent, but be very efficient in the way that board meeting is conducted. That meeting with the extension board president ahead of time to help keep that board moving forward is good. I would get past these financials as quickly as possible and get to programming and, more important, business. And not only us reporting and talking about what we're doing in the region, but also asking board members, really engaging them in meaningful conversation to really make the most of their representation on your boards.
Other ideas for 2022? I think a simple one is making sure that your board members are invited to all the programs you have going on. They're not going to all attend, and then having them report out and talk about that attendance and what they saw, and what many of them are quite surprised and pleasantly surprised when they attend some of our events that they've never attended. Let them report out on that and share that with others. You can even make it an expectation they attend so many. They could decide that as a board so that they are getting out and about and seeing programs at work, and that the only time you see them is not just at extension board meetings. With that, I'm going to close today's session. Thanks for all your ideas. Thanks, Hannah, including program highlights so they get a better idea of programming. Exactly. I think that's important. That's why they're there. We sometimes tend to overlook that, right? We get caught up in the details and we forget that's why we want them there. So thanks for joining today. This will be sent out as a recording if you want to go back to the questions. There were lots of them. And so thanks, Dave, for joining us and being able to answer all those.
Yep, and we'll do a follow-up with some of these loose ends.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.